The day the lawyer told me I had inherited my uncle's 1 million business, something inside me went still. Not happy, not excited, just still. My uncle and I were never close, but he trusted me enough to leave me everything, his company, his properties, his accounts. And for a moment, I thought maybe my life was finally turning toward the light. Then I opened my brother's email. It wasn't sent to me. It was forwarded by mistake from one of the company accounts. At first, I didn't recognize the thread, but the opening line froze me in my charity. Once he signs the papers, we move to phase 2. He'll never see it coming. The sender was my brother, my own blood. The rest of the emails made my stomach twist. He had been talking to a buyer behind my back. Their plan was simple: manipulate me into selling the entire business for a fraction of its value, pocket the difference, and leave me with nothing but debts and legal messes. They had already forged documents, prepared false financial reports, even contacted insiders to sway me. My uncle's death wasn't part of their plan, but my inheritance had become their opportunity. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound I'd known. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. I didn't expose the lies right away. Instead, I did something colder. I played along. For 3 months, I acted confused, overwhelmed, even a bit incompetent. I asked dumb questions during meetings. I let my brother think he was 10 steps ahead. Every time he smiled at me with that fake supportive grin, I felt the revenge sharpening inside me. Behind the scenes, I hired forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, lawyers with teeth. I dug through every hidden message, every falsified spreadsheet, every whisper of his scheme, and collected a mountain of proof. I rebuilt the company quietly, restructuring ownership so that every fraudulent attempt would trigger automatic consequences. I removed his access to accounts, shifted authority away from compromised staff, and secured everything under my control without him suspecting a thing. The trap was set long before he realized he was walking into it. The day everything collapsed, it happened fast. His bank accounts froze. His investor friends backed out. The buyer withdrew after my lawyers sent them evidence of conspiracy. His access card to the business failed at the front door. He called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer a single one. By the time he showed up at my house, he wasn't angry, he was terrified. His face was pale, eyes wide like a man watching his life crumble in front of him. He dropped to his knees on my porch, hands shaking. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "Please, you don't understand, I need help. I'm your brother." I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the weight of someone who finally understood the truth. Blood means nothing when the heart behind it is rotten. He begged me to fix what he broke, to save him from the consequences he willingly walked into, to undo the destruction he intended for me. I looked him in the eyes, coldly, calmly, and spoke the same words he wrote in that email. "You'll never see it coming." Then I closed the door. 3 months later, he's still trying to get back into my life, sending apologies, favors, promises. Every message starts with pleading, ends with desperation. But trust is a bridge burned only once, and the ashes don't rebuild. I kept the business, I kept my dignity, and I learned something powerful. Some revenge isn't about hurting someone back. It's about showing them you survived everything they hoped would destroy you. The day the lawyer told me I had inherited my uncle's 1 million business felt unreal, almost like a glitch in the universe meant for someone else. I remember sitting in that stiff, overly polished office chair, the kind that looked expensive, but felt like sitting on duty and discipline rather than comfort. The lawyer's voice was calm, almost casual, as though he was informing me about a delayed package rather than announcing the kind of fortune that could change a person's entire life. I didn't react at first. I didn't know how to. My mind just stopped, hanging in that strange space between disbelief and awe. All I managed was a stiff nod. I had never been my uncle's favorite. Our relationship was distant, not hateful, just neutral. He was the kind of man who spoke more to his machines than to his family, who spent long nights in his workshop and even longer days handling business deals. He wasn't warm, approachable, or affectionate. But he noticed things. He watched quietly, listened silently, and remembered every detail, even when he pretended not to care. Looking back, I think he knew exactly what kind of people surrounded me. Maybe that's why he chose me, because I was the only one who never tried to take anything from him. When the lawyer slid the documents across the table, something in my chest tightened. My name written in legal ink beside words like primary beneficiary owner, and exclusive rights. It felt heavy, as though the letters themselves carried the weight of my uncle's trust. Trust I never expected. Trust I didn't think I earned. I could almost hear his gravelly voice, that dry sarcasm he used whenever he pretended he wasn't proud of something. But beneath that imaginary remark was something else, something unfamiliar: responsibility. The numbers were dizzying: a company worth 211 million, several properties, savings accounts, shares, patents, vehicles, equipment worth more than I'd ever seen in my life. It didn't feel like an inheritance. It felt like being handed a world that wasn't mine. I walked out of the lawyer's office with the folder under my arm, my hands trembling. The sun outside felt too bright, the sidewalk too solid beneath my feet. People passed me on the street with ordinary faces and ordinary lives, having no idea that just minutes ago, my entire existence had shifted. When I reached my car, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there gripping the folder, staring at the dashboard while the weight of the news settled on me. I wasn't rich. Not really. I didn't suddenly feel wealthy or powerful. Instead, I felt a strange kind of fear, like someone had dropped a treasure chest into my arms, while warning me that thieves were already watching from the shadows. Because I knew my family. I knew the jealousy that simmered beneath their smiles. I knew the backhanded compliments, the whispered judgments, the way they measured each other, not with affection, but with competition. And I knew my brother. Many people who think they know us would say he's charming, charismatic, full of laughter. They don't see the cold ambition behind his smile, the way his eyes narrow whenever someone else gets something he wants. He had always walked through life expecting everything to fall into his hands, as though the world owed him luxury simply for existing. And now I had something he wanted, something bigger than anything either of us had ever touched. That realization didn't excite me, it scared me. Even as the thought flickered through my mind, a small part of me wished my uncle had left detailed instructions, warnings, anything that could guide me. But he was a man of few words, even in death. All he left behind was a business, a legacy, and a silent expectation that I would figure out the rest. I went home that evening and placed the documents on my dining table, staring at them as though they might rearrange themselves into something easier to understand. The numbers, the signatures, the valuation reports, they all seemed surreal. How could something so important, so life-changing, fit inside a single folder? Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake thinking about my uncle, about the quiet way he lived, the quiet way he observed, and the quiet way he must have chosen me despite all odds. A part of me felt overwhelmed, like I needed to prove he hadn't made a mistake. Another part felt strangely honored, like I had been given an opportunity to rebuild my life in a way I never imagined. But another thought lingered, unwelcome yet persistent. Nobody else in my family would take this news kindly. The inheritance didn't just change my future, it put a target on my back. At the time, I didn't know how right I was. I didn't know how betrayal would worm its way into my inbox. I didn't know my brother had already started planning how to take everything from me. I didn't know that trust, blood, and family loyalty would soon reveal their true worth. All I knew was that my life had just split into two parts before the inheritance, and everything that came after. The email wasn't meant for me. That was the first thing I understood when I opened it, and saw my brother's name at the top of the thread. He had sent it to one of the company accounts that automatically forwarded certain messages to the new owner, me. A tiny mistake, one slip of the finger, one wrong auto-fill in the address bar, and the truth landed in my inbox like a blade to the chest. The subject line was harmless, Phase 2. But the first sentence wasn't. Once he signs the papers, we move to Phase 2. He'll never see it coming. I read it 3 times before the meaning settled. My brother was talking about me. There was no other in our family who just inherited anything worth plotting over. The dread crawled up my spine before I could even process the rest of the thread. My heart thudded in my ears as I scrolled, each new message slicing deeper than the last. He had been planning this long before my uncle died. In one email, he complained about how slow the inheritance process was moving. In another, he discussed falsified financial reports with someone from the company's accounting team. There were scanned documents, altered statements, even drafts of a contract meant to trick me into selling the business for a laughably low price. They had already secured a shady buyer, someone willing to help them siphon off millions without leaving a trace. My brother, the person I once defended, protected, covered for, was plotting to steal everything my uncle trusted me with. And he wasn't alone. There were names I recognized, a family friend, an employee who'd been with my uncle for years, an outside consultant who had pretended to help me transition into ownership, people who had smiled at me, shaken my hand, pretended to care. I didn't know whether to laugh or break something. My first instinct was denial. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe the emails weren't real. Maybe he had some twisted reason that wasn't betrayal. But each message chipped away at that hope until there was nothing left but cold, solid truth. He wasn't just planning to trick me, he was preparing to ruin me. He wrote about how naive I was, how easily manipulated. He bragged about how he would step in when everything fell apart, posing as the helpful brother to gain legal control. He even joked about how I'd probably thank him afterward. The humiliation burned worse than the betrayal. My chest tightened as I kept reading. I saw lines about transferring assets behind my back, about pressuring me into signing documents I wouldn't bother reading, about making me believe the company was failing so I'd be desperate enough to hand it over. He wasn't just taking what was mine. He wanted me to look stupid while he did it. He wanted me to feel powerless, small, dependent on him. The worst part, he talked about my uncle too. He said my uncle was a fool for choosing me, that I wasn't capable, that I'd crack under pressure, that I didn't deserve anything I'd been given. That was the moment the shock turned into something sharper. I felt my hands shaking, not with fear, but with a slow boiling, silent anger that settled deep in my stomach, the kind that didn't explode but solidified, becoming something unmoving and cold, the kind that didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't collapse. It calculated. I sat back in my chair, the room eerily quiet except for the faint hum of my monitor. It was there, in that stillness, that I understood just how far my brother had gone, and just how far I would need to go to stop him. I reread every email carefully, saving each one, forwarding them to a private drive, backing them up where no one could touch them. Every sentence became a piece of a puzzle I never asked to solve but now couldn't ignore. I organized them by date, by sender, by topic. I highlighted parts that mentioned forged reports, secret meetings, and their so-called buyer. For every scheme they planned, I found a counter. For every lie they wrote, I found the truth they tried to bury. But what cut the deepest wasn't the business, the money, or the manipulation. It was that my brother had been waiting for me to fall. He had been rooting for it, hoping for it, counting on it. All my life, I thought his competitiveness was just harmless sibling rivalry. I thought his jealousy was just insecurity. I thought his occasional cruelty was just stress or bad luck. Never once did I imagine he could look at me, not a stranger, not a rival, but his own family, and see nothing but an obstacle to step over. I closed the laptop after hours of reading, feeling hollow. The house seemed different, quieter in a threatening way. The shadows felt longer. The air felt heavier. Betrayal does that. It changes the shape of familiar things. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff. I wasn't the same person anymore. Something had shifted inside me the moment I read that first line. The innocence I still clung to, the belief that family means protection, that trust is natural, that blood matters, gone. Just like that. I stared out the window at the streetlights flickering in the dark and whispered a truth that tasted bitter and metallic. If he wanted to destroy me, he should have made sure I never found that email. Because now he didn't just give himself an advantage. He gave me a reason. I didn't confront him. I didn't storm into his house, slam the emails on the table, and demand an explanation he'd only lie his way through. Anger makes people reckless, and recklessness was exactly what he expected from me. He thought I'd lash out, lose control, and give him the perfect chance to twist the narrative, me as the unstable, emotional brother who couldn't handle pressure. He planned everything with the assumption that I was predictable, so I decided to be unpredictable. Silence became my armor. Calmness became my strategy. I swallowed every ounce of rage and buried it beneath a mask so convincing that even I believed it some days. I wanted him relaxed, confident, careless. I wanted him smiling at me like I was the fool he thought he could control. I played the role perfectly. At meetings, I nodded slowly, pretending to struggle understanding basic terms. I accidentally mixed up files, asked questions I already knew the answers to, and acted like someone drowning in responsibilities. My brother ate it up. He'd pat my back, offer to help. and pretend he was guiding me while secretly tightening the noose he thought he'd place around my neck. Every time he smirked at my supposed incompetence, the fire inside me sharpened. The first step of my real plan was gathering information, quietly, carefully, without alerting anyone. I hired a forensic accountant, a specialist who had worked on corporate fraud cases. I didn't tell him the whole story. I only asked him to do an audit, to help me understand the company better. He didn't know he was gathering evidence that would eventually bury the conspirators. Next came cybersecurity experts. I wanted every digital trace traced, every deleted message recovered, every login monitored. It took weeks, but the deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. There were more people involved than I thought. More lies, more manipulation, more attempts to corner me financially. While they worked, I pretended to trust the very people planning to betray me. I showed up to the office with coffee, laughed at their jokes, and downplayed every sign of progress I was actually making. I asked for advice I didn't need, acted unsure about decisions I had fully prepared, and let them believe they were guiding me step by step toward the trap they set. But they never noticed the silent shifts happening right under their noses. I met with lawyers privately, ones who specialized in corporate restructuring and asset protection. Together, we redesigned the ownership layout of the business. I transferred certain powers to sub-entities, removed outdated permissions, and placed automatic legal triggers that would activate the moment someone attempted unauthorized actions. They didn't suspect a thing because, on the surface, everything remained the same. But behind the scenes, the business was becoming a fortress, one only I had the keys to. Every forged document they created became a piece of evidence stored safely in a private vault. Every altered report was mirrored with the original version. Every communication was backed up, time-stamped, and authenticated by experts. I didn't want revenge fueled by anger. I wanted justice constructed with precision. 3 months of pretending. 3 months of listening to my brother talk about loyalty while planning betrayal. 3 months of smiling while he sharpened a knife he thought he'd plunge into my back. But I watched everything. Every glance he exchanged with the corrupted accountant. Every rushed whisper behind closed doors. Every moment he thought I wasn't paying attention. And through it all, I remained calm. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because revenge tastes better when served cold, ice cold. There were nights I'd sit alone in my office after everyone left, staring at the city lights through the window. The weight of the secret pressed heavily on my shoulders, but it also kept me focused. I repeated one truth in my mind: if I struck too soon, I'd lose everything. So I waited. My brother grew bolder. That was the advantage of patience. Your enemy becomes careless. He'd brag about future plans, trying to steer conversations towards selling the company. He'd plant seeds designed to make me insecure, comments about market risks, operational costs, legal complications. He wanted me desperate. Desperation, after all, was the trapdoor to his victory. So I played desperate. I let my voice tremble during discussions about finances. I sighed dramatically in front of him, letting him think the stress was breaking me. I even told him I wasn't sure I could handle all this. The joy in his eyes when he heard those words nearly made me lose my composure. He thought he was close. He thought he had won. He thought I was folding. But while he fantasized about the perfect downfall he had engineered, I was building my own ending, one he would never see coming. By the time the evidence was assembled, the legal traps were set, and the company was fully secured. I knew I was ready. My silence had served its purpose. My act had bought me time. My patience had given me power. What he didn't know was that every move he made in those 3 months only tightened the noose around his own neck. And when the time came, I didn't just expose his plan. I dismantled his entire foundation, piece by piece, lie by lie. Exactly the way he tried to do to me, except cleaner, sharper, and far more devastating. And the best part, he never suspected a thing until it was far too late. I had spent 3 months preparing quietly, patiently, and with a kind of cold precision I didn't even know I was capable of. Revenge isn't always about striking back. It's about outsmarting the enemy while letting them believe they're still winning. And that was exactly what I did during that time. While my brother was steering his scheme forward, believing I was blindly stumbling into his trap, I was building my own intricate web design to snap shut around him the moment he made his final move. The first step was restructuring the company from the inside out. I met with a team of lawyers, People I specifically chose because they had dealt with hostile takeovers, corporate fraud, and internal sabotage. I told them exactly what I wanted: a structure that appeared unchanged on the surface, but was nearly impossible for anyone else to control or exploit. We rewrote bylaws, redistributed authority across sub-entities, and created new signatures that required my biometric confirmation. Every change was subtle but powerful, like moving the load, bearing beams of a building without touching the paint on the walls. Next came financial protection. I hired a forensic accountant who had no loyalty to anyone in the company. His job was simple: to comb through every account, every report, every hidden transaction. He found patterns I never would have noticed: these small discrepancies, false depreciation entries, and even ghost expenses meant to make the business appear financially weak. All these traces had been deliberately planted over the past year by the very people who were supposed to be ensuring the company's stability. The accountant documented everything, time-stamped it, archived it, and stored it safely. With every piece of evidence, my case became stronger. At the same time, cybersecurity experts worked around the clock. They traced every deleted message, every encrypted file, every midnight login attempt that wasn't mine. They found secret folders my brother used to communicate with the potential buyer, hidden under layers of misleading file names. They extracted data that had been wiped from company servers, contracts prepared without my knowledge, valuation documents altered to make the business look unprofitable, and spreadsheets showing plans for asset liquidation. Every piece mattered. But while all this was happening behind closed doors, I continued to play the clueless, overwhelmed owner. I made deliberate mistakes during meetings. I asked my brother for help in ways that fed his ego, making him believe I was relying on him more each day. When he recommended certain advisors, I thanked him and pretended to accept their input, knowing they were part of his plan and knowing my cybersecurity team was recording every word they typed or sent. I let them think their influence was growing. I let them think I was leaning towards selling the business. But the closer they thought they were getting, the more evidence they left behind. I also started making quiet personnel changes. In departments where I sensed loyalty, I promoted honest workers who had been overlooked. I reassigned corrupted employees to roles with no access to sensitive information. And when necessary, I hired new people: discreet, intelligent, trustworthy. I did all this slowly so no one noticed the shift. By the time my brother realized what had happened, the company's internal structure was different enough that he couldn't move without running into walls I had built. One of the most important things I did was secure the company's assets. I opened new accounts under legal protections, transferred intellectual property rights, and re-registered patents in a way that required my direct approval for any changes. My lawyers crafted a clause that automatically triggered legal notifications to authorities if anyone attempted unauthorized sales or transfers. It was like placing invisible lasers around the company, undetectable unless someone tried to cross them. My brother had no idea that every forged document, every altered report, and every attempt to mislead me was being cataloged and prepared for the final blow. He thought he was being clever and strategic, but his confidence blinded him. He didn't notice the subtle changes in security protocols. He didn't notice that the buyer he had lined up was being monitored. He didn't notice that new contracts were legally binding in ways he couldn't override. By the time everything was set, the company was no longer vulnerable. It was fortified. The day finally came when he tried to push me towards signing the contract that would transfer the business. He showed up with fake concern, talking about rising risks and how selling now would protect me. I let him talk. I let him act like he was saving me from my own supposed incompetence. And when he placed the contract in front of me, I didn't even look at it. I simply said I needed a few hours to think it over. Those hours were all I needed. My lawyers notified the authorities. The forensic accountant prepared final summary reports. The cybersecurity team compiled every digital trace of the conspiracy. Automatic protections went live, freezing accounts linked to fraudulent access. The buyer received formal legal warnings and immediately distanced themselves. Employees involved in the scheme found their security badges disabled. And my brother, who had spent months tightening a trap around me, walked straight into the one I created for him. That was when his plan collapsed around him in a single afternoon. The moment he lost access to company files, panic set in. The moment he discovered his bank accounts frozen due to suspicious activity, fear replaced arrogance. And the moment he realized the buyer had vanished, leaving him to take the fall alone, he finally understood that the person he had been underestimating for months had seen everything, and that I had been preparing for this very moment since the day I read his email. I didn't just protect the business. I dismantled his entire scheme, and he never saw any of it coming. He didn't knock the way he usually did. There was no cocky rhythm, no dramatic pause, no impatient tapping of his foot on the porch. Instead, there was a slow, shaky knock, 3 uneven taps that barely reached through the door. I knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. I could feel it, the same way you can feel a storm before it breaks. Except this one wasn't power, it was desperation. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. Ghosn was the polished, confident man who strutted through life as if everything belonged to him. His hair was a mess, his clothes wrinkled, and his shoulders slumped forward like the weight of the world had finally caught up to him. His eyes, once sharp and judging, were red and glassy, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone who had been crying or screaming or both. He didn't try to speak immediately. His breath hitched, his throat working to form a sentence that kept dying before it reached his tongue. And then, as if something inside him finally snapped, he dropped to his knees right there on my front step. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking into pieces. "Please, you have to help me." The irony almost made me laugh. He wanted help. From the very person he'd tried to destroy. From the brother he had labeled knave, incompetent, easy to manipulate. But I stayed quiet. Not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because I wanted to see just how far he'd fall before he realized the consequences of what he'd done. He kept talking, words spilling out like they were drowning him. Everything had unraveled fast for him, faster than he imagined. The buyer pulled out the moment they received the legal notice. His conspirators turned on him instantly, each blaming him for the scheme and scrambling to save themselves. His accounts were flagged and frozen because the fraudulent activity triggered automatic investigations. Some of his assets were seized while authorities reviewed the reports. His emails were subpoenaed. He was questioned. He was losing everything, and he finally understood that the world he thought he controlled had never belonged to him in the first place. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he choked out. I was stupid. I made mistakes. Please, you're the only one who can fix it. You're my brother. You have to help me." I had imagined this moment before. I envisioned feeling victorious, satisfied, vindicated. But as I watched him kneel on my porch, trembling, broken, stripped of the arrogance he once wore like a crown, I felt something unexpected. Not pity, not guilt, not triumph, just clarity. This wasn't him apologizing. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't a sudden realization of the pain he caused. It was fear of consequences, fear of losing his lifestyle. Fear of facing the fallout of choices he thought would never catch up to him. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was sorry he got caught. Everything he had done came flooding back to me: the forged documents, the secret meetings, the way he smiled at me during dinners while planning to strip me of everything my uncle left. The thought that he wanted me ruined, wanted me desperate, broken, dependent on him, hit me again with the same sting it had the first time I read his emails. He never once thought about me, only what he could take from me. And now that he had nothing left, he finally remembered I existed. I stepped outside, standing over him as he knelt there. His hands were clasped together tightly, knuckles white, shaking uncontrollably. He looked up at me with a kind of pleading that no longer moved me. "Please," he whispered again, "I need you." I kept my voice steady, a calmness born from months of quiet hurt turning into something resolute. "You needed me," I said slowly, "when you decided to betray me. But back then, the only thing you needed was my downfall." He shook his head desperately. No, I was stupid. I was jealous. I didn't think." "That's the problem," I cut in. "You didn't think. You only wanted." He tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. His fingers grasped at air before falling uselessly to his sides. "You don't understand." He tried again, his voice rising. "Everything is falling apart. They're blaming me. They're investigating. I'm losing everything. I'm scared." For a moment, I simply looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't the mastermind anymore. He wasn't the confident manipulator or the schemer who believed he could outsmart everyone. He was just a man who'd finally run out of excuses. But I didn't owe him anything. No explanation, no forgiveness, no rescue. He created this disaster. He fed it, nurtured it, and believed he'd walk away from it untouched. He destroyed trust like it was disposable, like I was disposable. And now he wanted me to shield him from the very consequences he had orchestrated. I took a slow breath, meeting his frantic eyes. "You wrote something once," I said quietly. "In one of the emails." Confusion flickered in his expression as he searched his memory. I leaned in, letting him hear the same words he once wrote with confidence dripping from them. He'll never see it coming. The realization hit him like a blow. His face crumpled, his lips trembling. But I didn't wait for another plea. I turned around and stepped back inside. The last thing he saw before the door closed was the calm, unbroken expression of the man he tried and failed to destroy. And on the other side of the door, I felt something powerful. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. The kind that comes when you choose yourself fully, finally, and without regret. That day, he begged. But I didn't bend, and the person who walked away stronger wasn't him. It was me. For weeks after that day, my phone lit up with messages I didn't open. Missed calls stacked like tower blocks. Voicemails piled up so quickly that the inbox filled and stopped accepting new ones. He showed up twice more, once with flowers, once with tears, but both times he left without me opening the door. And in that silence, something inside me settled permanently. Revenge isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with shouting, smashed glass, or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is the kind delivered quietly, by moving on, by growing stronger, by refusing to let the person who hurt you ever have access to your peace again. In the days that followed, people who had sided with my brother tried to reach out. Some sent apologetic texts. Others pretended they never knew what was going on. A few tried to distance themselves from him so aggressively it was almost funny. They shifted their loyalty in seconds, as if their sudden change of heart could erase their months of scheming. I didn't respond to any of them. I had learned something from all of this. Loyalty isn't about shared blood or shared history. It's about shared integrity. Some people will stand with you only when it benefits them. Others will switch sides as soon as the wind changes direction. And then there are the rare few who stay true even when no one else does. Through all the chaos, I discovered who truly belonged in that rare category. A few old employees who had been quietly loyal to my uncle came forward with the truth once the investigation started. They provided statements, documents, and even voice recordings that they felt uneasy keeping, but hadn't known who to trust with. They apologized for not speaking sooner, but I didn't hold it against them. Fear makes people freeze. It doesn't mean they're bad. If anything, their courage afterward showed me that good people still existed around the edges of all the deceit. The business started to stabilize. With the corrupted employees removed and the structure protected, everything felt lighter, more breathable. Departments that had been drowning under sabotage began to operate smoothly again. Productivity went up. Morale improved. I wasn't the clueless newcomer they had expected to crumble. I was now the steady center holding everything together. And strangely, my uncle's decision to leave the business to me finally made sense. He had seen something in me that no one else bothered to notice: resilience. Not the loud kind, not the aggressive kind, but the quiet, steady kind, the kind that can withstand storms without bending in the wrong direction. The kind that doesn't fall apart when betrayed. The kind that chooses logic over impulse, patience over panic. And maybe that strength was inherited from him, even if we hadn't been close. Maybe he saw my brother's hunger for power long before I did. Maybe he saw the danger in leaving the company to someone who craved ownership instead of someone who respected it. The money no longer meant what it once did. It wasn't a miracle, a lottery, or a life-changing blessing. It was responsibility, one I carried more carefully after realizing how many hands had been ready to snatch it away from me. Weeks turned into months. My brother's life didn't improve. The investigation continued. The people he once trusted vanished from his side. His job prospects evaporated once word spread about the accusations surrounding him. Friends who used to laugh with him avoided him like a sinking ship. And he stayed away from my house after those first 2 desperate attempts. Maybe he finally understood that the distance was permanent. Maybe he realized that the door he tried to break, metaphorically and financially, was now sealed forever. But I didn't rejoice in his downfall. I didn't sit around smiling at reports or gossip. What happened to him wasn't a victory. It was the natural consequence of the choices he made. You can't plant poison and expect flowers to grow. And the peace that followed wasn't born from watching him suffer. It came from knowing I'd survived everything he designed to break me. That's when I understood something important. Revenge isn't about destroying the other person. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. Every time people saw me moving forward, running the business successfully, strengthening what was once vulnerable, they told me I must be proud, that I won, that I beat him. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like healing. I learned to trust selectively, to choose people carefully, to listen to my instincts instead of dismissing them for the sake of peace. I learned that silence can be a weapon, but it can also be a shield. And I learned the true meaning of closure. It isn't about hearing an apology. It's about accepting that you don't need one. Some nights, I think about the version of me who sat stunned in that lawyer's office months earlier, clutching the inheritance papers with trembling hands, unaware of the storm waiting on the other side. That version of me was uncertain, naive, still believing that family betrayal was something that only happened in movies or tragic stories. Now, I know better. But I also know I'm stronger. The business flourished. My confidence grew. My future expanded into directions I never expected. And none of it required revenge in its traditional sense. Just resilience, clarity, and the courage to walk away from someone who once shared my blood, but never shared my loyalty. In the end, he begged to come back into my life. But I chose myself instead, and that is a victory no amount of money could ever compare to.